And then China responded by doing 125% tariffs on the United States. And this is where we are right now, right? It has affected the stock market. It has affected business leaders, as well as CEOs around the United States, as well as around the world, right? So we are now going to discuss it more on a different level, right? When it comes to how we purchase goods on a daily basis, if it's through Amazon, Walmart, going to Costco, going to the grocery store, how is that impacting you and others around the United States? Let's get into it.
In this tiny warehouse in Northern California, Dusty Kenny is getting her products ready to sell on Amazon.
We make baby spoons, baby placemats, bento boxes, bowls, plates, cups, and we manufacture them in China, and they come via sea in all these boxes here.
But now Kenny is facing a giant additional cost, a 125% tariff on all her goods coming from China.
We have tens of thousands of products here in this warehouse. And when you add a tariff to all of that, and you're trying to absorb that for your customer to not raise prices on them, that adds up to an astronomical amount.
On April 2nd, Trump announced big, aggressive tariffs, a 10% baseline on nearly all imports to the U.S. and far steeper rates on many nations.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them.
This is my livelihood. This is how we put food on the table. It could put me out of business.
Stocks tumbled amid fears of reciprocal tariffs, rising prices, and slowing consumer spend. Although Trump did put a 90-day pause on tariffs for some countries on April 9th.
Prices will go up in the short term. There's no doubt about it.
CNBC sat down with 8 U.S. businesses who sell on Amazon to find out how the new tariffs are having an impact on their prices, their competitors in China, and their customers' willingness to spend. Tariffs have been around since America's early days. But since the creation of the federal income tax in 1913, they've become a smaller and smaller portion of federal revenue, with some notable moments of tariff increases along the way. By the 2010s, the average tariff was just 1% to 3%. Then Trump sent tariffs soaring during his first term, taxing steel and aluminum from U.S. allies, threatening tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and launching a trade war with China. Sound familiar?
Brands come to us panicked about tariffs. We started talking to our clients about recommending getting out of China a long time ago when the first rounds of tariffs came up. And then Biden became president. We said, Biden's not going to remove it.
Sure enough, most of Trump's first-term tariffs continued under Biden. And now Trump's back. He started with a 10% tariff on most Chinese goods in February. China retaliated with an added 15% tariff on some U.S. imports. Trump raised the China tariff to 20% on March 4th. That's also when whopping new 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada went into effect.
I was in a state of shock, and it was very sudden. We have to stop everything. We cannot afford selling goods anymore.
Portable Winch Co. has been making its car winches in Canada for more than 20 years and simply driving them an hour to the U.S. border for duty-free shipping to American customers, until now.
The U.S. is a growing market for us. It represents like 22% of our sales. We are questioning ourselves if we just move our focus to Europe. Is it really a negotiation tactic? Maybe. I hope so.
So what she was talking about is the dilemma that business owners have when it comes to, how they allocate their income, their revenue when it comes to different countries. If it's within the United States, if that's within China, if that's Japan, depending on who's buying and who's selling, right? Then business around the world gets impacted. So when Trump initially in 2016 put tariffs on China, there were businesses like Apple and Microsoft, as well as Nvidia, that started to make adjustments to where they basically did business. Technically, if you talk about an import from China, right? So at one point, Nvidia's business was at around 25% revenue coming in from China specifically. they started to make those adjustments towards other countries like Vietnam and India, things like that, so that they would not be impacted at 25% of what their revenue is from a business, because of the tariffs that basically China is getting hit. So when you're talking about international business and imports and exports, things like that, if you are getting taxed, which is really a tax on everything that's being imported or exported within your business, when it comes to your revenue, it is significantly impacted if you have a 10%, 20%, now we're up to 125% tariff on doing business. You have to, in some cases, totally stop doing business within the countries that's being impacted, or in other cases, if you are a business in another country, you're going to stop doing business within the United States, which totally changes a lot of things when it comes to imports, exports, and doing business around the world. So the dilemma that business owners have is, do I continue to do business? Do I need to make changes? What adjustments need to be made? And how does that impact my bottom line when it comes to my profits, my revenue, and ultimately how much money I'm making on a daily, weekly, monthly, and annual basis?
I sincerely hope so.
Then on April 2nd, Trump made his biggest move yet, reciprocal tariffs on 180 countries, with an average rate the highest it's been since the Great Depression. There's a blanket 10% tariff on nearly all imports, 20% on the European Union, and big tariffs in Asia, 32% on Taiwan, 46% on Vietnam, 49% on Cambodia, although Trump did put a pause on tariffs for some countries on April 9th. But in the biggest blow for many Amazon sellers, Trump doubled down on China tariffs, raising them to a humongous 125%, following China's own retaliatory tariff of 84% on U.S. goods. Estimates show some 60 to 70% of goods on Amazon come from China. Although most products on Amazon are sold by third parties, tariffs will also impact its own brands like Amazon Basics.
They're trying to win.
So if we go back and we take a look at this chart where it talked about how Amazon is being significantly impacted by tariffs, because 60% of the goods that's sold on Amazon is made in China. 60%. So what we do in the United States is we buy things and then it's getting imported within the United States, and then we basically get delivered to your home, right? We don't actually manufacture much of anything anymore, which is why China is making everything, right? From the shirt to the electronics to the chips to a lot of the things that we buy on a daily basis, computers, etc. A lot of those things are being imported within the United States from countries like China. So when you have things that's being taxed and tariffs are being added onto, these items, then prices have to go up, right? As a business owner, if I have an item that's being taxed on top of what the cost is when it comes to, making this item, I have to raise the prices so that I can continue to make a profit. My profits might come down. Let's say my profit margin was 30% within my business. I might take a 5%, dip on that 30%. I might get to 25, but I'm not going no lower than 10 to 20% when it comes to my profits due to these policies that's being implemented and ultimately the trade war that's happening right now between these two countries, these two mega powers, and trade, right? So the only way that I can compensate for that is raising prices, which then that impacts us and that impacts you. And then how we go about moving forward is so important, because we need to decide, what are we doing? How are we buying it? And ultimately what we need, because all of this Amazon deliveries that's coming to our houses on a daily basis, that's cool, but your wallet will be impacted significantly if we continue to buy the amount of things that we buy on a daily basis within the United States because of these tariffs and how it's being impacted prices on Amazon specifically.
Products on Amazon are sold by third parties. Tariffs will also impact its own brands like Amazon Basics.
They're trying to win by saying we have a similar feature set to the national battery at a lower price. And so if they have to raise that price, consumers are likely to have a preference for that well-known, familiar brand.
So will Amazon increase prices on its own brands, passing the new tariff cost on to consumers?
The last thing they want to do is right away just pass it to the consumer, because you don't know how transitory this is. I think if it extends after, call it 6 months, then a lot of those ultimately get passed to the consumer.
As for whether third-party sellers will need to raise prices,
I will hold my prices for as long as I can and just absorb those tariffs because I'm already competing against those Chinese sellers that are undercutting me.
On Amazon, yeah, we'll probably increase the price by, 10 to 20% at some point.
Tariffs are going to increase the price of toys for the consumer. There's no doubt about it.
while tariffs on China are nothing new, it's unusual for them to hit certain types of goods, like toys.
I mean, it's real steel. This is a real steel, really tangible toy. This toy retails for $29.99. This will end up costing $5 to $10 more as these tariffs fully pass through.
Jay Foreman runs Florida-based Basic Fun. With $200 million in annual sales, its well-known labels sell on Amazon and at retailers like Walmart and Target.
Tonka trucks, Care Bears, Lincoln Logs, Tinker Toys, Light Bright. And as with most in the toy business, we make the overwhelming majority of our product in China. China, has a tremendous workforce, and not only a tremendous workforce, but they've invested in the infrastructure to create a toy manufacturing supply chain.
Because of China tariffs during Trump's first term, Foreman says a lot of toy manufacturing has moved to Vietnam, Mexico, and India in the last 5 years.
So that point right there, right? So because of tariffs, people choose to do business in other countries, right? And China actually found a way to get away with this and actually move and do subsidiaries, I can't say that word, subs in other countries to then, get away with the fact that they are getting tariffed. They just go to another country, build a business, open up, a warehouse in another country and say, well, it's being exported really from Vietnam, or it's really being exported from Mexico or India, when in reality, it's still China. They just know how to play the game, right? And this is that next level understanding of how to do business in these places and how that impacts you, right? So, but understand that, people have started to move away from China and go to Vietnam, Mexico, and India to do business with the United States because they realize that the United States and China does not have a great relationship, and it has not continued to, get better over time because of these tariffs and because of other issues like, Taiwan and things like that. But these last 5 years, from 2016 to the current situation when tariffs started becoming a conversation, this change has been happening, right? Businesses like NVIDIA has started to move, their chip manufacturing and their imports not from China, but then to Vietnam, right? And then you have Mexico when it comes to the auto industry and how Mexico is, and when it comes to imports into the United States, Mexico is a big player when it comes to buying car parts and things like that. And, cars, because it's easier to do business with the United States if you're in Mexico versus if you're in China, right? So understanding these things, impacts how we go about making our decisions, in our daily lives.
The interesting part there is that most of the factories that operate in places, toy factories anyway, that operate in places like Vietnam, India, and Mexico are owned by Chinese anyway. So you're sort of not escaping doing business with the Chinese.
It's been crazy. Sometimes we find information because we get an invoice or we see the customs entry document. And we're like, well, what do we charge? What do we charge again?
John 𝐥𝐤𝐤 owns St. Louis-based Genius Games. He does the majority of his yearly $2 million in sales on Amazon and makes his science-based board games in China.
The actual machinery to manufacture at the quality that we need primarily exists in China, and we have not seen samples that will compare to the same level of quality.
And toys are just one category among many that rely on China for manufacturing and assembly due to lower costs and established infrastructure.
This is one of the most amazing pieces of technology, and this thing is made in China. And whether you're making a Tonka truck in China or an Apple iPhone, they figured it out.
Almost all electric.
So that's just one example of how the United States and China's tariff war, because it's really a trade war currently right now, is impacting Amazon specifically, right? So we buy things on a daily basis from Amazon, but a lot of those things are being imported from China. They're made in China, then imported here to the United States. And because of the tariff situation, you know, when you got 125% tariffs on an item that's coming from China, prices got to go up.